Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and in this episode we are going to begin walking through the Overkill's ATR 72600 tutorial PDF guide that is soon to be released in the next couple of days. So stick around guys and you're going to find out more about it. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides or simply interested in supporting the channel, please consider joining me on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides as well as any future guides that come along down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below, and thank you to all of my current subscribers. So folks, here is an example of the ATR 72600 guide that I have designed here. Now this, just like all of my other guides, walks you through a full cold and dark from your departure to cold and dark at your destination. You can see there's still a few things to populate as we're not quite complete, but like I said, in the next couple of days it will be full cockpit tour with absolutely everything detailed, broken down for you. Everything you need to complete this flight and at least get going with the ATR is included inside of the guide. Today we are going to be walking through the pre-flight, if you will, and take us all the way to taxi to the runway is what the idea behind this video will be about, and a link to this video will be found in the guide as well. Now to all those who say it, well, why would I get a guide if I can just look it up on YouTube? This video being a perfect example. Every single one of my guides has an associated at least one video that follows along with it as well. But I wanted you guys to know that these guides are available, and this, like all of my other guides, will be available on my Patreon site to levels tier 2 and above, which give you access to every single one of the guides that I have put out that are just like this one. The idea behind it is to have something physical that you can have in front of you where you can take your step, or you take your pace step by step, I should say, all the way down to your destination. So it is an incredibly effective tool in my personal opinion. It's always nice to have something off to the side that you can work at your own pace that isn't play, pause, play, pause, play, pause. So anyways, guys, let's go ahead and get started walking through the first section of the guide. The first thing that we're going to do is walk through just the basic use that I do of the tablet. Again, I'm going to go through the guide page by page. Now, the guide's going to have a bit more on the final release. So one of the things I will not be doing today is we're not going to go through the cockpit tour. Just sort of follow along with me, guys, and you'll start figuring out where things are. The guide, however, obviously goes in depth on the cockpit tour, pointing out every single little button. So that makes things quite a bit nicer. Now, I do recommend that you set up your account with SimBrief. You will just log in, put your pilot ID here, and then it will be saved automatically. And then you can just import your flight plan directly into the FlyPad. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to set fuel. I'm not going to use the set flight plan. And it will, if you choose to use that, it will only load in everything from your departure, your destination, and any airways and waypoints in between the SID and the star. It will not load in the SID and star for you, as I've stated before in previous videos, simply because of the fact that those can be changed by ATC. All right, so let's keep on going here. So after we import the OFP, the next thing we're going to do is set our fuel and our payload. So we're going to set those two, click on them. And then we'll move on down to the next section, which is the payload. And this is where we actually load the weights into the aircraft. And you'll also get all your operating speeds right under here as well. So we're going to go load aircraft. And you can see here, 0 fuel weight. So this is where we get all of our fuel on board. Everything should populate down here. If you have an overweight or a max gross weight or anything like that, then your fuel weight will need to be adjusted to make sure that you can safely get the aircraft operating in the air. Then going over to passengers and cargo, select again. Again, notice that our 0 fuel weight and things like that have increased. Make sure that you don't go over the limits. One of the other things that I will touch on very briefly here is if you go to the options pad, you can set your different units of measurement and different regulations based on the zone that you're in. I also recommend going through the throttle setup, as this was quite a pain in the butt to figure out. Now, one thing I will show you real quick is if you go to your controls, by default, if you, for example, I am using the TCA Airbus pack because it has the detents in it. So I thought that would be really effective here, much like it is with the Airbus. So from Thrustmaster, Microsoft Flight Simulator has a default profile that it uses that is incorrect, that will have you pulling your hair out trying to figure out the throttle. Let me get that plugged in, actually. There we go. Keep default. Okay, so moving over to the quadrant, this is the kicker. What you will find is that by default, Microsoft Flight Simulator uses 0 or throttle access 1, throttle access 2, but it says 0 to 100%. You do not want that. That is what was causing me such a headache. It took me a couple of hours to figure out what the heck was going on, because the throttle works with every other aircraft that I've flown. I haven't had any other issues. This is the first aircraft that gave me any problems. So what you'll find again is they'll say throttle 1, 0 to 100%. You do not want that one. You want it just to be just like you're seeing here. Throttle 1 axis, throttle 2 axis, and that is all you want. And then come in here and you can set your detents. And this part's really easy. You just push it into the idle position, hit the set button for left and right throttle. Notch, left and right throttle. Ramp, left and right throttle. And why does engine 2 look weird? So actually here, I'll just walk through it for you guys real quick. So here's the throttles at idle. We're going to hit set and set. Now I'm going to move into the notch position. Notch is basically like our takeoff position. And then your ramp is going to be your high speed. And I set that just at the next detent. I actually have a detent to spare. There we go. That's better. That's probably why it was fighting me. And then your tolerance levels. You can set within this range. I am still going to maintain inside of this particular configuration. So if you have like a throttle that's ghosting, or maybe it's not quite as sensitive, you may want to increase or decrease these numbers based on where you're at. But it will mean that if the throttle moves from this range this number range. So for example, if it went to 1510, we would still be in the ramp tolerance. Okay. Anyway, hope that made sense. Let's go ahead and move on. But I did want you guys to be aware of that gotcha, because it was frustrating to figure out why my throttles weren't working. Speaking of which, I should probably make sure that they're down. All right, let's continue on with the guide. So we've got our contents loaded. Now we would go through the cockpit tour. And again, you guys will sort of catch it as I walk through everything. So let's sort of start doing our pre-flight here. So first thing we would do is come back here and check all the circuit breakers and make sure that they are pushing and closed. I believe we have 2 circuit breaker panels here on this aircraft. We have one behind the first officer seat and one on the rear of the overhead panel. Now the circuit breakers aren't modeled, so it's just more for show at this point. Make sure your parking brake is set, retracted towards you, is actually locked into place. Your throttle levers are at idle, and your gust lock is engaged. Condition lever should be in the cutoff position, and flap should be retracted. And then of course, landing gear handle is down. Okay, then let's move back over to the EFB. Let's get a couple of things set up for us here. Okay, so now we are going to set up the exterior equipment. So the thing with the ATR is we want our ground power on. We want to make sure our tail prop is on. We're going to open up the service doors, cargo doors, and the main doors for passenger boarding. Here you can also set all of your pre-flight states if you wish to skip any of this. Part of the fun for me is actually setting up the aircraft. So we'll move on to the next page here. All right, let's begin our checks. So coming upstairs, we're going to make sure the wipers are both in the off position. We're going to turn our battery to the on position. We're going to monitor the MFC systems check. Make sure that all fault lights go out. Landing gears indicating 3 green. ESS emergency bus lights should be illuminated, and the standby under voltage light should be extinguished. Let's go ahead and turn the nav lights on, letting people know the aircraft is powered on. Moving down, we'll go ahead and clear the master caution. You'll find yourself doing this quite a few times. Now, there is a bug, I would call it, because the behavior is inaccurate. The proper steps at this point should be to lift up the left maintenance panel. Now that we have ground power connected to the aircraft, we should be able to switch over to external power and read the voltage. However, unfortunately, this seems to have been reversed. So we're going to come up top, and we're going to turn on the external power. And then when we step back downstairs, we should get a voltage reading. You can see we're running 28. And you want 28 or above in order to maintain the aircraft external power. Okay. We're going to come over and make sure that our integrated electronic standby instrument is aligned. And we actually have to wait for the PFD to come on as well, or the nav display. Or PFD. No, that's right. PFD. So we'll give it a second here to continue powering on. You'll find that the you can move a lot faster than the aircraft does. There we go. All right, so we're just going to make sure that they both read the same information. And it looks like all is well there. Now, moving back up top, we're going to turn off all white lights with the exception of the probe heaters here and the fuel pumps down over here. So we're going to start by turning on our hydraulic power, crew oxygen supply, and the windshield heaters. Okay. Pretty simple start. Now, one of the really nice things about the ATR is because so many of the controls are behind you. Like these control your MFD displays. This is all of your radio information. There's our second clear of the master caution. So the nice thing about what they've done with the ATR is added touchscreen functionality. I'm going to show you guys where to find those real quick. As a shortcut, this is kind of a nice thing to have handy up. And it's display cockpit help. So each one of these screens you can change by simply touching on them. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to switch over to hydraulic power, for example, by clicking on the screen there. And you can see we now have the hydraulic menu. Okay. From here, we are now going to come back behind the parking brake and hit the hydraulic auxiliary pump. For 30 seconds, this will run the hydraulic pump. You can see that, I believe, let's make sure we get our colors right. Blue and the auxiliary pump are now pressurized, but we also want to pressurize the entire system. So we're going to come up top, hit the cross feed, and you can now see that the entire system has now been pressurized. Once the entire system is pressurized, we can go back up and turn that auxiliary pump back off. And at this point is where you would begin walking through the external checklist if you had one. Now, to prep for the external walk around, you would turn on your beacon lights, your logo lights, and your wing lights, so that way everything can be verified as functioning as designed. We're also going to come over to our emergency exit lights, go to the arm position, and at this point we could also test our annunciator lights. Go all the way into the test position, and here you would make sure that you don't have any out lights. Everything is illuminating as it should. All warning and caution lights are on, and indicators are working properly. And then you would set it back down to the necessary setting. You would want bright for the day operation, dim for night operations. Now we'll test the fuel pump system. So first we're going to go for the left pump, turn it on, make sure that the low pressure feed light turns off. Turn on the cross feed from the left pump, make sure the right low feed pressure turns off. Turn on the right pump and remove the cross feed and make sure that the feed lights remain extinguished. And they can stay in this current position here. Moving up forward, you're going to make sure that all your doors are as they should be. Now, one of the things you want to do is do a test of the indicators for the cabin and service door. You're going to press it, and what this light does is simulates as if the doors were closed. Basically tells the system these two doors are actually closed, and you want to make sure that the lights illuminate as they should, letting you know that it's safe. Release the test switch, and move on with our pre-flight jet. All right, so let's continue walking our way up here. So again, you want to make sure that you have 3 landing gears indicating no MFC system fault lights. You also want to make sure your TLU, or rudder travel limit unit, this limits the amount of action that the rudder can take, is set in the auto position and none of the fault lights are on. Next, the engine 1 fire test. We're going to do a squib test first. Make sure that the squib comes on. Then we're going to do a fault test. And finally, the fire test. Now, the fire test can be a little bit trickier. I recommend binding a quick camera down to the engine display panel, and you can see that we actually do get the warning populating. But if you let go and try to move your camera, it's not going to work. Okay, so coming back upstairs, let's continue on. So that's engine 1. And let's continue working our way through. Set exterior lights as necessary. Now we're going to turn on the propeller brake and set up hotel mode. What hotel mode does is think of it as sort of like an APU for this particular aircraft. It engages the engine but not the propeller, providing generator power to the rest of the aircraft, allowing you to come off of external power if necessary or in a situation where external power isn't available. So, and again, that is called hotel mode. So once again, we're going to come down to our hydraulic auxiliary pump, give it a depression. Again, you have 30 seconds, so we want to make sure that we move pretty quick. And make sure that the ready light is indicating. Open up the cover, switch the prop brake to on, close the cover once again, and you are now set. Makes it very, very simple. On your electronic panel up here, you want to make sure you don't have any other fault lights other than DC Gen 1 and Gen 2. These are going to be in this condition simply because the engines are turned off. Now, the BTC will show as a single green line guard. This actually should be indicating for both, and it should turn off once the engines are running, but unfortunately there is a bug where that does not. But when the aircraft is complete, this should fully extinguish once both engines are running, both generators are running. The rest of the panel should look basically as is. The voice recorder, you would normally run a test. Unfortunately, the test doesn't do anything at the moment. It's not modeled. Let's move our way back down to the bottom here. There we go. That's better. I don't know why that was fighting me so much. Okay, now moving through the rest of our tests here. For pre-flight, we want to make sure the no devices and seatbelt signs. Seatbelt signs only if refueling is complete. Now, I did an instant refuel by doing it through the flypad. But if you are actually manually refueling the aircraft and running through the refuel process, you do not turn your seatbelt signs on until the aircraft is fueled. That way, if there's any kind of emergency that happens during refueling, the aircraft can be deboarded as quickly as possible without people fumbling with their seatbelts. But in our case, we can go ahead and turn our seatbelt signs on. Excuse me. Going over to the anti-icing panel, that you should only have the airframe de-icing fault light on, again, as primary electrical power has not been established as of yet. Same thing with the above anti-icing panel. Only if you are in anti-icing conditions or icing conditions would you turn any of this stuff on. At the moment, we leave it as is. Probe heaters remain off. Fault lights should be illuminated as shown. The windshield heaters, again, we don't have any DC power onto the aircraft yet from the generators, so the fault lights remain off. AC wild electric power. This is primarily used by ground crew for maintenance, especially when the aircraft is in tow. You will never turn on the external power. There's no reason for us in the simulation world to actually activate the AC wild power, so the panel should remain as is. Hydraulic power, again, engines being off. And no pressurization to the system by default. They should be in the current state. As far as the emergency locator, you would never actually test this system in real life as there is no way to do so. If you activate the ELT, the system will actually generate a live call indicating that the aircraft is in distress. So even in the real world, you would not test the emergency locator transmitter. Let's come back to the front, move ourselves over a little bit. There we go. Again, windshield wipers are in the off position. Enunciator lights we've already tested. Your air conditioning and air panel, the bleed panel should show as is. Again, you're going to have engine 1 and engine 2 bleeds, as well as the pack fault lights are going to be on as there is no pressure to the system at the moment with the engines being in the off position. Avionics mode shown as is, clear of any lights and in the auto position. This is the avionics cooling system. And then oxygen we've already turned on. Make sure that you don't have any fault lights there. You would run a smoke test. This is for the avionics smoke test system. Let's see if I can get you guys a display again. So we're going to hold it. I'm going to switch cameras. And again, you can see the alerts that follow on the engine display panel. Coming back upstairs, we let go. To reset the exhaust mode fault light, you're going to depress it once to clear light, depress it again to reset the system. And if you are looking up close, you can actually see on the second press the button comes back up. And then finally, the engine 2 fire test. Do our squib test, fault light test, engine 2 fire test. All right, and that should complete our pre-flight of the overhead panel. So now let's move on back to the throttle checks. Assuming that I can remember which camera does what. Okay, now this is the automatic takeoff power control system. It's what allows us to set the throttle into a particular notch and have the engine manage the engine power system. What we're going to do here is we're going to test in the event of a failure of one of the engines, and we want to make sure that a few things happen. Once torque loss is detected, the other engine should automatically feather, and then trim should be adjusted to compensate for the engine loss. So how we're going to do is we're going to open the cover. We're going to test it. Oh, let's go to ARM first. You want to make sure that the ARM light displays correctly on the engine control panel here. Okay, now you're going to find that every couple seconds the cover closes. It's actually really annoying. So you just sort of have to suck up and deal with that. We're going to close it back again. Come back up, and what you can see, there we go. There's our engine 1 out warning system. Auto feather has been engaged to the propeller of the lost motor. RPMs are showing, or torque is showing that it has been lost, and the second engine increases to compensate. And let's go ahead and set this back to the central position. And then you would repeat that process on the second engine. For the sake of saving time, I won't do that for you guys today. This aircraft does get pretty dark, so I do recommend while you're back here turning on some floodlights. Even during the day, some of the panels can get pretty hard to see, so just keep that in mind. At this point here, you could also test all of your trim controls. I'm not going to walk through it, but essentially what you would do is click on each of the individual trim sections and make sure that the corresponding control moves to its full left or right position. Again, I'm not going to do this in the interest of saving time. Yes, it absolutely does work. So if you want to test the rudder, for example, you would simply move it all the way over, and you can see that it has started to move, and you would move it all the way to full one direction, all the way full the other direction. But we don't want to do that. I think we still have some rudder trim there. There we go. I think that's close enough. I think we're centered. Okay. And again, you would test that in all directions to its full capacity. In the interest of saving time, I'm trying to help you guys out by not doing that today. Adjust your radio panels as desired, as well as your FS or your basically all of your radio panels, nav displays, etc. is what you would be messing with here. This is the MFD control panel. Here's where you would configure it as desired. So for example, if we wanted to go back to the nav display here, we could do that. Now you have a couple of different options here. Here is a mode selector. Well, actually, yeah, it'll work temporarily. So for a minute, all you guys are going to see is this guy. Let me make sure that I am seeing, that you guys are seeing what I think you're seeing. You are indeed. Okay. And so if I rotate this knob, this is where OBS gets a little tricky for me. So I'm going to be rotating this knob right here. Let me put that back where it was. Okay, now you guys should see that. Rotating that knob will change between the different screens. Okay, these are the different nav display screens. Now I'm going to click on Performance. Here's the performance pages. There's your video of the cargo bay, which I think is just too cool. Your systems pages. Miscellaneous, not available yet. And your map. Okay. And there's a few other systems that I can show you guys that we can cycle through here in just a minute. Let's go ahead and close the pop-out window so you guys can see everything else. We'll get to that. And then this one here, these two here are your range selectors where you can change the display range, your bearing options, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video here. Moving to the rest of our pre-flight checklist, you want to make sure that the idle gate fault light is not illuminated. You want to make sure the idle gate is pulled for a lock. On the red lever here, or you want to make sure your gust lock is engaged. You want to make sure your flaps are retracted. We talked about before. Emergency audio cancel is closed and guarded. All right, so to set up our nav information, or nav radios. So first we're going to start with the nav radio itself. Here you could program all of your ILS and any kind of navigation VOR radios that you may need for departure. There will be a time where we will come back to this as well, so stand by on that. Communication radios, you have a couple different ways of entering everything in. You can either just click on the box and enter your frequency in here and press enter. So like if we wanted to repeat what was already up here, let's do 124.0 85, press enter. There you go. And then for the swap, you can just hit the swap screen. It's the fastest way to do it. And it makes things significantly easier. Come down to surveillance. This is where you have your transponder information. So we could set our transponder code again by clicking in here. Do like 3589 here. Hit enter. You can change your different settings simply by clicking here. And you can set transponder 1, transponder 2. TCAS, we're going to move down there. We're going to make sure that we're set in auto mode currently for TCAS. And that's pretty much it for that. Makes it very, very easy and very, very easy to handle, I should say. Let's go back to nav for a second. Go to the nav display overlay. This is for your TCAS information. If you have your weather radar, you can select weather, terrain, or nothing. And then for your TCAS, if you want to report above, normal, below, none, etc. Again, pretty simple once you figure out how to navigate the system. Let's go back to comms. Keep that as default. Let's do a weather radar test. So for the weather radar test, we're going to come down here to the weather radar. And we're going to rotate the control knob all the way over to test. You should see the rainbow lines displaying across. Once you see the full arc, you can move it back, in our case, to standby. If you do intend to use the weather radar, you want to set that to about 5 degrees of tilt. Otherwise, the weather radar will be staring at the ground. So that doesn't really help us very much. And the weather radar, even if you were to set it to active right now, the weather radar does not go active until weight is off the wheels. Okay, moving forward. And this is why I told you guys we didn't go through the cockpit tour, because we were just sort of going to see 90% of it anyway. The stick pusher shaken, you'll open up the gate, go to an off position, make sure that the lights illuminate, click it back off, turn it off. Any icing warnings or APM lights are all disabled. You can do a test. Unfortunately, some of them aren't exactly functional. Make sure your PEC lights are illuminated, or de-illuminated, I should say, extinguished. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry, guys. I'm really tired. I don't know why. And that is going to be the propeller electronic control switches. Okay, so these essentially control the RPMs of the engines. And then make sure your boost lights are off. Both the on and the fault light should be removed. Power management control switch should be in the takeoff position. Flaps and all trims should be in the neutral and retracted position as indicated here. Your total outside temperature, outside air temperature, and static air temperature should basically be the same. No more than 2 degrees of variance between the two. But ideally they should be exactly the same, especially when on the ground. Fuel used should read the same. However, since we really haven't used any fuel, we actually want to reset that. And how we're going to do that is we're going to come down to our control panel, go to performance, and you guys can see here, reset fuel used. Go ahead and give that a click. Sends everything back to the 0 position. Moving over to the right side of the engine display, you want to make sure your anti-skid light is extinguished. All landing gears are indicated 3 green. Landing elevation, that doesn't actually work at the moment. It's not modeled as of yet. Make sure all of your pressurization systems are clear of any faults or lights. And we're going to turn the manual cabin altitude to about the 9 o'clock position for pressurization. And we'll make sure the anti-skid is on. Obviously, that is off. That is on. Okay? And we'll do a test on that later on. Oh, hit the wrong button. There we go. All right, it's coming up. You want to make sure that your chronometers are set to the correct time. The PFD doesn't have any flags on it. Heading indication is correct. Heading indicator is confirmed on the nav display. So how we would do that is right here. Make sure that your heading matches on both sides. And then from here, we'll go ahead and select over to the different screens like we were talking about earlier. Oh, never mind. That's what I'm trying to do, is get back to my nav display. And then if you come right on the edges, you can cycle between the rows, the plan, and the arc. Personally, I like rows. And then we could walk through the various pages again real quick just to further break those down. Okay, so here we have our hydraulics page. We have the engine secondary and fuel page. This will automatically pop up when you start your engine start process. Your doors page and pressurization, oxygen supply. Your hydraulic system, or excuse me, your electronic system. Both DC and AC. Come on. And there is our hydraulic system. And it should take us back to where we started. So come over to the left side, takes us back to nav display. Let's continue on. Let's run a ground proximity warning test. Just going to press the warning button, hold it.
Terrain awareness, test, start. Terrain awareness, system test. Terrain awareness, test, complete.
Go ahead and run through the rest of the pre-flight here. Make sure that the standby compass works properly. On the flight guidance control panel, we want to make sure that FMS source 1 is set to the captain's side, or the captain's side should say is set to FMS 1, and then FMS 2 should be for the first officer side. We want to make sure that the autopilot navigation source is set to the pilot flying. So in our case, we're going to be flying from the left seat. If we were flying from the right seat, we'd move it to the right. We want it on the left. Okay. Pretty easy stuff. Coming back over to the left-hand side, you want to make sure the brake accumulator pressure is clear. This would only be probably populated again during tow. Let's go down a little bit further, probably make that a little bit easier to see here. Our AC switch should be in the normal flight position and guarded. Our steering tiller over here should be in the centered position. Nose wheel steering should be on and the switch is covered. Oxygen mask, you can test the airflow by depressing the button. Make sure that the bubble opens up, indicating that oxygen has passed through it. And we will go ahead and open the communication door. This is where we would receive all of our documentation, flight low plan, all that good stuff, until the engine start. At the left engine start is when we would close that door. All right, and I've already showed you guys how to go through your radio menus. Go ahead and set our barometric pressure. Now you have two different ways to set the barometric pressure. Of course, the cheater way always works. You can also use the rotary here if you want to get your ATIS information. Let's go ahead and see what ATIS is saying today. So our big thing here is winds at 100 at 9 knots, visibility 10, scattered clouds at flight level 26. Temperature 31, dew point 24 with an altimeter of 3007. Let's go ahead and set our altimeter. Okay, altimeter set, and it should set on both sides. Although that one says 6, interestingly. And it doesn't look like it's quite modeled, so it's not quite syncing up, but that's okay. Close enough for our simulator purposes. All right, now let's start programming the FMS. All right, so moving down to the FMC, first thing we're going to do is select the FMS. Make sure your configuration nav data show in the OK position. Go to initialization. From initialization, we're going to start with our weights. Now, you'll see that the weights are populated, but something I want to show you guys, and I think this is a bug, is if you look at fuel on board and gross weight, they are not populated, and they should be. Okay, so what we want to do here is you're just going to enter in the exact same information that's already there. So you're just going to do 42359 and drop that in. Now, that should show fuel on board and gross weight already populated, but fuel on board, if we go over to our flight plan, I actually don't think is correct. So I'm going to check that. Well, but we've used a little bit because the fuel pumps are running. So 5019, we could change that. So let's go ahead and come down. So let's do that. Let's go 5019. Let's go ahead and drop that in. There you go. Changes your gross weight. The gross weight we'll leave alone. And now we have our, basically all I did was refuel the aircraft. And we'll go ahead and make sure that we do that here as well. So you could have left it. We have more than enough fuel on. It's just because the... close. Just because the fuel pumps have been running this whole time, and obviously things are a bit slower when you're doing a tutorial. So we'll go to load aircraft, go to 0 fuel weight, start loading the fuel again. You can see the fuel repopulates. Ironically enough, though, it's actually still lower than what I set in the flight plan. Now, you can do a couple different things. We can leave it as is. It's certainly more than enough in the fuel weight, or you can set it to what the OFP was. So let's go ahead and I'm going to back that up, and we're going to do the same thing, 5019, and start loading. There you go, 5020. Always double check your OFP. Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and come back down to the FMC. And let's continue on with our guide. So I've shown you guys that little trick. Now we're going to go to the return page. We're going to go to performance initialization. And here's where we set our cruise altitude, which we're going to be flying at 160 today. Drop that up there. Okay, our alternate. Our alternate today is KHSV. And our cruise altitude to there would be 180. Okay, drop that in. Good to go. Now let's start the flight plan initialization itself. So come back again to the main page, go to flight plan initialization, come up to route, and now's where we start identifying the aircraft. So we're going to do ATR, I don't know, what did I put in here? 2598. Okay, and we are going from Kilo Mike Charlie Oscar, heading over to Atlanta. And it does take a couple seconds for that to populate. And we're going to go ahead and hit execute. Once you hit execute, you'll be presented with a route page. So first thing we need to do is set up our star, or our SID, excuse me. So we're going to first identify the runway. So we are expected to come out today on... My flight plan today changed. I am doing this using live weather, as I assume most of you will probably do. Some of the feedback I got from my previous guide. And that will be 36 left is our runway today. So we're going to go 36 left. And we are going to be coming out of the Red Sox 1. There it is. Using the Jeffries transition. And hit execute. Okay, now our next waypoint is a direct. So we're going from Jeffries direct to Amory. All right, so what we're going to do here is find Jeffries, select it, next waypoint. We're going to do AMORY for Amory and drop it into the next waypoint section. You can verify it's where it belongs. Oops. Jeffries direct to Amory, hit execute. Okay. And then next, we need to set up an airway. From Amory is our entry point onto the Quebec 110. So we're going to select Amory, Airways, Quebec 110, the only one available. And then we jump onto the Quebec 110 from Amory, where we're exiting the 110, and that is at dawn. We're going to drop that right in there and hit execute. Go back to the return page. The previous page, and now we are ready to set up our star. So for our star, we're going to select the arrival airport. We are expected to come in on the ILS 26 right, using the Gandalf 2. And if you look at the approach plate, and the approach plate is included in the guide, we're going to come in on Zelo as our initial fix. And our transition, oh, you know what? I missed one, but you know what? We can go ahead and enter that in now. Let me show you guys real quick what I did. The guide will have you enter this in manually, but I want to show you guys what I got going on here. Where is it? There it is. Cool. Okay, so if we come right here, let me zoom this in so you guys can see it better. There we go, that's better. So we entered the Quebec 110, we went to dawn. What we forgot was this guy right here. So we could have done this one of two ways. We could have selected dawn, entered in Bjorn as our next waypoint, and that would have set it as direct. In our case, this is also a transition onto the star. Okay, so we're just going to enter it in that way. So there's two different ways you could do this. The guide will have you go back through the procedures of entering in a direct waypoint simply because you only get to do it once. I thought that was better experience to practice entering in direct waypoints. So that's one way to do it. But what we're going to do today is I'm actually going to show you guys just to use it as the transition. Enter that in, hit execute. Let's start going through the next page. So there's Jeffries to Amory. Amory jumping on the Q110. Exiting the Q110 at dawn. From dawn, going direct to Bjorn. Jumping onto the Gandalf 2. Now, for our flight plan discontinuity, we just need to clear that. I think there's one more in here. Yep. And this is from the exiting the star, jumping onto the approach. And clear that as well. Manual, this is typically a position where you would get vectored in. You can either clear those out or leave them as is. I think we'll clear the manuals out today. I think I have one more. Oh, maybe not. Any of your blue waypoints are your missed approach. But that's golden. And then finally, just like any of the other aircraft, we can test it. Now, how you got to do that is pay attention to the FMS. I know it's kind of hard to see because of the view rating here, but if we select the plan page, you can see the FMS has changed to flight plan. And at which point we can now do next. Let me increase that range a little bit. And the range can be increased and decreased using the click spots. Let's expand it out. There we go. That's a good one. And now we'll just hit next. And you can see as we start walking through the different flight points. Here you'd be looking for any missed discontinuities, breaks in the flight plan, waypoints that take you way out of a wrong direction, something that just flat out doesn't make sense for your flight. We're going to be talking about these kind of waypoints here. Strider. So this is 24,000 feet. The aircraft has a max ceiling of only 25,000 feet. So our cruise altitude is 6,000 or 16,000 feet. So one of the things that I recommend doing with waypoints like this, I mean, our flight is only 430 miles, I think. The aircraft only has, I think, a maximum range of 750. So what I recommend doing with these kind of waypoints, and I don't know if this is a bug in the VNav system or what it is, if you find yourself on the descent and you enable VNav and you have a waypoint with an altitude restriction like this, the aircraft will try to climb back up to it. I think it is a bug. I don't think that's by design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove any waypoints that are above, that have an altitude restriction, I should say, above our cruise altitude. So we're going to remove Strider. And let's keep stepping through. I think I have to execute first. That would probably be helpful. So let's go back. Yep, there's Bjorn. Okay, let's keep going. So below flight level, above 11,000, below 25, that's good. Above 10,000, below 25, that's fine. Come here. And there's Zelo, our initial fix at 5,000. So that was the only one that we really had to worry about. What did I hit? I did not mean to. That was the only one that brought any kind of concern. And I just, again, that was the weird bug that I had noticed. I posted on the Patreon site as well as on the Discord. So if any of you saw that, that was what I was experiencing. Was in waypoints where there was an altitude restriction, even though I was already below it. And actually on the descent, the aircraft would try to climb back up to the altitude restriction, which in many ways makes sense. But I don't feel like I should just take it from you. But anyway, so anything that has a waypoint like that, I do recommend removing. And again, that will be included in the guide. That's one of the modifications that I had to make to the guide to show that. All right. And I think we are just about ready to go, guys. We're just about ready to start the engines up, walking through the rest of our process here. We've cleared those out. We've walked through the steps. All right. So now it's time to start looking at the pre-flight checklists, pre-start checklists, and final cockpit preparation checklists that are built into the aircraft. All right. So now we're going to move on to the final cockpit preparation checklists. The ATR has a bunch of checklists pre-built into it. Now, you're always going to start with this one here, and it will change based on different configurations of the aircraft. It will automatically populate new checklists, like when it comes time to take off, when it comes time for the descent, things like that. The checklist will automatically switch pages. Now, again, just like everything else, it has a couple of click spots. Here we can, if we click here, it will cycle up, cycle down, and here will be a select. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit the select button, sort of work my way down here. This is all the stuff that we sort of went through in the beginning. Okay, and I'm just going to work through. I always just go through it. Here we go, until we get to here. When you get to the final cockpit preparation, okay, you can see 1 of 2. That's where we're at here. And this is after, basically we're getting ready for engine start is essentially where we're at here. So again, hit select, confirm the version, procedure completed, and now we're here. So parking brake, we know that we've checked it. Altimeters, we've set, and you guys can feel free to work your way around as we talked about. Landing elevation, now this should be automatically populated in the by the FMS. Again, remember I told you it's not currently functional. We've set our FMS, our communications, and our navs. We've verified our fuel quantity and fuel on board is as we expect it to be. Engine fuel used, make sure they're both 0. If not, remember go over to the performance page on the MFD and hit reset fuel used. Memo panel, okay, here's our memo panel, making sure there isn't anything that we need to check at the moment. This is all due to engine power being off. Power management switch set to the takeoff position. Procedure complete. Okay, now we're going to move over into the propeller cold and dark, or cold and dark, nice. Propeller cold and dark. Anyway, we're going to move over to the before propeller rotation. Why can I not talk today? Okay, so in order to do that, start setting up for hotel mode. The next thing that we are going to do is come up and let's go back over to aircraft. And we are going to close our service door because we're going to be starting the right engine, not the propeller, but we're going to be starting the engine. Okay. And this will get us into the hotel mode. So you can see here, this is before propeller rotation. We're not quite there yet. We're going to show you guys how to get it into hotel mode. Remember I said hotel mode is basically the equivalent of running the APU in this kind of aircraft. The engine is going to be running, but the propeller is not going to be spinning. Now we're going to do this with engine 2. So we're going to come up top. We're going to make sure our right fuel pump is enabled. Okay, remember we have our propeller brake on. We want to make sure that that is currently set. Now, on the engine start switch, you can do A, B, or A and B. For the first start of the day, you would typically, I believe, use A. And then B, you would alternate days. So you would, basically, if you used A on the first start today, you would use B on the first start tomorrow. And then the rest of the starts throughout the day, you would use A and B. And I think that should say the starter. Obviously, for simulation, we're not limited by that. So we're just going to come down. I'm just going to select A and B. And we're going to hit Start 2. Now, remember I told you guys that as you engage the starter, your MFD will automatically change to the engine display page. At 10% of NH% or engine rotation, okay, we're going to come back and set our right condition lever to the feather position. Again, you want to do that at 10%. At 45%, we should hear the engine starter click off. Which if we go up top, you can see the start switch is now de-illuminated. Make sure your oil pressure rises. NH stabilizes right around 70%. Temperature is okay. And inlet temperature is also set as well. And then your fuel flow obviously needs to show an indication. Coming back upstairs, we should see that the engine bleed switch for the right engine is the fault light went out, and both packs have now gone out as well. Now, something else that is another bug. The Nvme Gen fault 2 light should already be extinguished at the time that the engine starts rotating, indicating that the generator is working. We may still be on external power, but the generator should have power. This is another bug. Don't let it bother you guys. So what we're going to do here is disconnect from external power, and you can see the Gen 2 light now extinguishes, in which case we can return over to the EFB and disconnect the ground power. So we are now under our own power in the aircraft. And then finally, our last step here would be come up top, change the engine start back to start abort, or off and abort. You can also see the ESS bus light, emergency light, also extinguished at the time we did that. Okay, so now we're going to do some final preparation on the FMS. So let's go back to the performance page. Here is our V speeds. Make sure your transition altitude is right for your region. For example, if you're in Europe, I believe it's 6,000 feet. United States, it's always 18,000 feet. Performance initialization. Notice that this is now blank. Don't worry about that. You do not need to re-enter it. We're just in here to verify some information. Okay, so don't let that throw you off. Okay, we're going to move over to weight. And what we're interested in here is our trim. 1.5 degrees up on the trim. So we're going to come over here. I'm going to re-enable the yoke. Left switch right here. Bring it up. Oh, wrong way. To 1.5, and I'm watching over there on the engine display page. I think I went too far. Did I go too far? Nope, got it. 1.5. All right, so our trim is set. Next, let's confirm the takeoff data. So from here, we're going to go back to the performance page. I like using the buttons. I still prefer them over the touchscreen. Don't ask me why. If you're in icing conditions, obviously you would select icing conditions. We are definitely not, as we are coming out of Orlando, Florida. Trust me, there is no ice here right now. And we're going to confirm takeoff data. Takeoff data confirmed. You will also notice a magenta indicator next to the trim indicator here on the engine display page, telling you that the takeoff data has now been confirmed, and we can return back to the nav display. Okay. At that point, we can now close the remaining doors. So we're going to close our service door, close the cargo door, and stow the tail prop. We'll leave the wheel chocks on for the time being, as we are not quite ready for taxi. Okay. Moving on to our before propeller start checklist. So coming back down here, and by the way, all these checklists do exist up here in the window as well. It's just, if you want this to go away, it's going to make you walk through anyway. Now, there is no inhibition that I'm aware of on the aircraft if you don't complete these, but I like to walk through them, as that's the idea, is to use the features that exist in the aircraft for me. So let's go ahead and walk through this. So first thing we have is CDLS, or Cockpit Door Locking System. Now, even though this isn't currently modeled, you can find that switch right here on the wall behind the first officer seat. Okay. Oops, I didn't mean to double tap it. Sorry, guys. All right, so that one's done. FMS and takeoff data has been confirmed. Trims, make sure that they're set on all three axes. We just need the elevator trim set. Tail prop is on board and stowed. Doors, we can come over to the doors page. All doors are closed. There's door, 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 and door. The other thing we can do is go upstairs and verify that our doors are sealed here. Okay, coming back down. Close. Seatbelt signs are on. Beacon light, I believe, should be on. It is. Clear. Procedure complete. All right, and we are now ready to begin propeller rotation. So at this point, we're sort of going to do the inverse of the process we did earlier. We're going to depress the hydraulic auxiliary pump, come back upstairs, notice the red light on the prop brake, lift the guard, remove the propeller brake, and the engine will actually already start rotating. Let's see if I can get back to our engine display page in time. There we go. And here you can see we also have our temperatures here. NP percent right here, the 12.6, that is your propeller rotation. Okay, so at this point what we're going to do is come all the way back here and move our right throttle to the auto position. So give that another click. And you'll see that rotation increasing now. And low pitch indicator is a good thing. Now remember, at this point, like I was saying, what am I doing? There we go. The BTC closed light should extinguish. Unfortunately, it's a bug, so it's not working at the moment. And the ACW, the AC Wild Fault 2 light and Gen 2 light, you notice is now extinguished as well, indicating that generator 2 on engine 2 is now functioning properly. We're going to turn on our true system, or the transformer rectify unit. Close the guard. Our probe heaters can now all be turned on. Anti-icing again if required. The anti-skid we can now test. You can see wheel A skid on the engine display page on the memo panel. Clear the master caution. And we'll also now set flaps to 15. Monitoring here. All right, and now it's time to start engine 1. So we're just going to repeat our process that we did before. Come upstairs, move down to start AB, just like we did before. Make sure the fuel pump is on. Run 1. And just like before, monitoring everything that we saw before. So 10%. Cut off to feather. %45 or above. Propeller to auto. And we also wanted to make sure, that we closed that. And now we'll just wait for both engines to stabilize. Come up top. Engine start switch. Back to abort. Start 1. Extinguished. DC Gen 1 extinguished. Bleed cross valve extinguished, no longer needed. And again, we close the communication door. Now we can start setting our initial altitudes. So for our current flight plan, our current restriction is 7,000 feet. Make sure that we are set on the pilot side. We can set your departure heading. You can either do this now, or I prefer to do it when I line up on the center line of the runway. That way you can just tap the center button. Make sure pilot side is FMS 1, just like we did before. Speed target. Notice that currently it's in manual mode. You come over here, select it, and we're now running on the FMS. So that's our initial takeoff power. On the autopilot panel, we're first going to hit heading mode. Notice the annunciation displays. Then we're going to hit nav mode to select LNAV, have that armed. Indicated airspeed. Indicated airspeed now being tracked using the FMS speed. And then enable VNAV. VNAV at indicated airspeed. So the aircraft will follow the FMF speed while maintaining the climb profile. Okay. And then now we are ready for the pre-taxi checklist. So let's go ahead and come on down here. So before taxi checklist, we're going to hit select. We would hit the recall button on the caution panel. The cockpit communication hatch we just checked. The condition levers 1 and 2 are in auto. Sorry, I had something in my throat. Anti-icing as required. TRU, that's that switch we turned on next to the battery switch. Anti-skid test was performed. Flaps are 15 and nose wheel steering is engaged. Procedure complete. And we are now ready to taxi to our runway. So we'll go up, turn our taxi light on. On the pilot side, or the first officer side, we're going to come over here and select the elapsed timer. That starts the chronometer. Timers can be found by going to Data on the FMS and Timers. And you can now see it's been 15 seconds since we depressed that button, if you ever need to see the elapsed time of the aircraft. Okay, and the final thing that we need to do is release the parking brake and select Takeoff Configuration Test. If you have a failure, for example, let's say we go to no flaps, you will get an alert. And now the taxi checklist. So to get to the taxi checklist, we're going to step down to normal procedures, select normal procedures, and work our way down until we find taxi. Taxi lights are on. Brakes we'll check in just a second. Flight guidance control panel are set. Takeoff configuration test was performed. Procedure completed. So the final step here, we should have verified that our parking brake is released. The gust lock can remain on for now. Let me get myself situated here. My throttle is a little far away from me. There we go. Oh, gosh. First mistake of the day. Looked right over it. Probably should remove the wheel chocks. Then we're ready for taxi. And do a brake check. Perfect. And taxi to your runway. Now, I will tell you what the ATR in taxiing it, once it gets rolling, it moves very, very easily. It doesn't require a whole lot. I know I'm not supposed to taxi this way, but we're doing it. I may make these guides, but there are some things I still have to do my way. Still have to break the rules here and there. Just like any other aircraft, taxi between 20-25 knots on straightaway. You can find your ground speed down at the bottom of the primary flight display. Turning it, don't want to turn above 10 knots. Or from here, again, just continue your taxi instructions however you acquired them, whether that be by looking at the chart or air traffic control. Hold short of your runway, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys found this useful. See you guys soon.